I would like to introduce you to my wonderful colleague, Sandeep Janarkar. And Sandeep and I, with Sarah, have been here since the beginning. And he is the master of all things interactive at this very interactive school and understands technology better than anybody. And Sandeep is going to, as I said, talk to people who are outside of our business, you lucky dogs, about the kind of opportunities that they see and ways to meet our challenge. So Sandeep, over to you.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon. It's going to be a really great panel. It's called How Tech Innovators Would Solve Media's Problems. That's a really heavy, there's a great burden on you guys right now. So, but one of the things, I'm going to cut my preamble down a little bit because we're running out of time. But one of the things that I'd like to avoid this evening is where we rehash all the problems that we're facing. And I really want to try to focus on opportunities. And I want to focus on opportunities that we may not be seeing because we are so mired in how everything works around us and how it's been working for a long time that we can't look outside of this paradigm. But we have fresh eyes, people from outside the industry, and I'm hoping that based on their expertises, and they come from all different backgrounds, from political campaigning, social organizing, venture capital, finding the right companies to invest in, as well as ways of taking information and visualizing it and analyzing it as well. So what I figured we'd do is I'm going to give each of the panelists about 5 minutes to keep to one focused idea, one way that they see opportunities, ways for us to engage with our audience, to grow our audience, and to grow our business. One thing I've told them, I do not want them to be thinking about following the rules of journalism. We want to blow those up, and we want to see what they can come up with in terms of new news ideas, new relationships between journalists and a community, new business models, new efficiencies in technology and business as well. So I figured we'd do this alphabetically. And if you are tweeting this, it'd be great. Media innovation, hashtag media innovation. So I'm going to start off with Milena Berry. And she's the co-founder of Power to Fly, a firm whose dual mission is to empower companies by closing their gender gap in tech and help millions of women around the world find innovative jobs. She was also the CTO of the distributed online activist community Avaaz.org. And she took that technology platform from having no users or barely any users to 33 million members. So, Elena.
Hey, everyone. So I'm going to start by saying that at Avaaz, I was always the nerd amongst content creators, our campaigners. I had nothing to do with the message of the organization. I was there to basically create the systems for that message to get out to our members and to enable that campaigning to happen. And it's really interesting because reflecting on that experience, I definitely see how we use the power of storytelling to create change. So a lot of what we did there, and so like not just to report on the story that's happening, but to take that story, analyze for the potential for it to affect it somehow towards a hopeful outcome, and then basically mobilize citizens around the world to take an action on that item so that they could change a political outcome, fundraise for climate disaster, help with a genocide situation, et cetera, et cetera. So if there is one thing I want to give to this crowd is to think about not just reporting, but how can you take your reporting to the next level? And as you tell your story, what are the tools that we have these days to basically enable your readers to take an action based on the story that you've told? And there's a lot of examples, well, some examples out there that I've started to see. The Dodo is a site that I don't know how many of you know, but it tells stories of animals mishaps, and that's a site that I've seen that uses now take an action based on it, right? I think Move On has experimented with this, where they would tell you something of a political disaster or like content related to it, and then they say, and now take an action and do something about it. So that's one thing that comes to mind. The other thing about stories is that, I don't know how true that is, but I heard that Obama was not such a great speaker until he met with Marshall Ganz, who's a researcher who wrote an amazing essay, and I encourage all of you to Google it and read it. It's just a 2-pager, but it talks about the story of me, of like how to write a good political speech, right? And every good political speech, according to Marshall Ganz, should have 3 components. One is the story of me, the next component is the story of us, and then the last piece is the story of now. And so if you think about this for a moment, I think there is a potential here for journalists to basically create more transformative work if you use this motto of saying, okay, so this is the story of me, this is the story that I'm writing, this is the story of us, which is what all of us can do about the situation, and the story of now is what do we have to act on to actually change now. So that's a little bit that kind of I wanted to leave with you. The other piece that, as I reflected on this day, was interesting to me was how, from what I've heard, journalists are told to tell impartial stories, right? To be objective, to represent the truth from all different sides. And I find this less and less relevant as I read the news myself. I want to read an opinion. I want to express an opinion based on a story that I've read. I want to like it, to comment it, to forward it, because I have liked this opinion. And so I encourage all of you to go the less impartial route, but to take a stand with the story that you're writing, because that's what resonates with me, at least, and I hope that resonates with more people. And lastly, I wanted to bring it back a little bit to what we're doing at Power to Fly and how that kind of affects the journalism world. First of all, we started by being a platform for remote jobs for women in tech, but we're quickly finding out that there's a lot of demand in journalists and writers and social media editors for our platform. So it's actually becoming the second largest audience for us. So I think it says something about the industry and the type of work that people are looking for. So I encourage all of you working in newsrooms to kind of open an eye to the remote worker out there. And second of all, I think we're we're the only job platform that I have seen out there which really focuses on telling the story of the individual applying for a job. So if you looked at LinkedIn, it's very dry, right? There's like education, there's experience, there's like skills. And at Power to Fly, we're kind of merging. My co-founder comes from an editorial background. She worked at the Huffington Post and Washington Post, et cetera. And we're kind of merging those learnings from these big media properties where they kind of had like the big splash and the big headline and a big focus on the story to grow an audience. We're taking that approach and basically merging it into the job search process so that when a woman applies for a job, she's not just a resume, not just a professional, but she tells the story of her life there, because that, in our thinking, represents, well, this is who you're getting. You're not just getting a robot who knows how to program. You're getting a mom who loves to mountain bike on the weekend, and I see her crossing a river with 2 little kids. This is part of who she is. And if you see the woman as an individual and as this is her story, apart from her professional life, we feel that we have a chance to basically break the gender ratio that's happening and to convince employers to go for it and embrace this new way of working. So I hope this kind of left you with a few nuggets there. I don't know if it's just one.
Great, and we'll come back to the Q&A after all the panelists have spoken. So next is Gilad Lotan. He's the chief data scientist at BetaWorks, a technology company that operates as a studio building new products, growing companies and seeding investing. And he also previously ran the data team at SocialFlow and built visualizations at Microsoft's Hughes Labs. And he's going to talk about algorithms and human editors.
Great. It's great to be here, so thanks for having me. So my job as the chief data scientist at BetaWorks is to really think hard about what we do with our data. especially around productizing it. So I'll just give you a little bit of context around BetaWorks. We're kind of a unique beast in the technology space. We're a startup studio, but we're not like your typical incubator. There's no like set amount of time that companies launch out of. BetaWorks, we are very well known for our investments, so we invest in a whole slew of very early stage companies. We were one of the first to invest in Kickstarter and Tumblr, and there are over 100 companies out there that we've invested in. But the majority of people at BetaWorks focus on building product, right? Most people at BetaWorks are builders. And there are about 13 companies currently incubated at BetaWorks. The focus is mainly media, but not only. But how do you define media these days, right? So we have a very successful casual games company called Dots. We have sort of an online media portal called Dig, Instapaper, Read It Later app. And we have a weather app, a very popular weather app, personalized weather app. So they're all sort of takes on media, very different versions for what you would typically see in, I think, a media company. So at BetaWorks, we keep companies for a while, and sometimes they launch out, sometimes they stay for a long time. And we also think a lot about these shared resources. So what I do as someone who leads the data science team is constantly be in touch with the different companies and figure out what are their problems around data. So how can we help these companies grow quickly using their data? And then what can we do, what new things can we do with external data sources or internal data sources that we have? How can we launch new companies out of this? So we're constantly thinking through the frame of products. And I want to give you a few examples of how we use data. Especially this interesting space where human editors meet algorithms, where I think there's a lot that could be done. So one of the companies that I'll talk about is Poncho. Very briefly, it's a personalized weather service. It's very simple. So what it does is it sends you a daily message or twice a day message about the weather. But it's sort of designed to be, it's like the message your mom would have sent you. So there's no numbers, no charts. Right? It's just like what you need, if you need a sweater or not, if you need to take an umbrella, and something about your commute. Right? So it's personalized to you and your needs that day. And it started as like literally a person getting up in the morning, looking outside, kind of doing some searches online, and then sending out message to all the members in New York City. And obviously that doesn't really scale, right? It did well in New York, and then we launched in Boston, but we're trying to figure out, okay, so how do we actually scale this service and keep it sort of really fun, quirky? There are typically GIFs in your messages and jokes, right? So you can't automate the text part, and that's what people love about this product. But what we did was start pulling in all this weather data from different publicly available services, as well as not like private services that had sort of aggregate data about the weather. And we started running various algorithms on it. So we're trying to identify regions in the United States which displayed similar weather patterns that moment, right, and within the next few hours. So we're constantly, instead of sort of multicasting and sending a message that an editor writes from one region to that region, we're thinking, what other regions display similar weather patterns and are culturally similar enough? So taking sort of human editorial judgment, feeding that into our clustering algorithm, and then having editors sort of write the messages to regions instead of specific zip codes. So using data and using this effectively math with inputs from editors, and then with editors every day, we could actually scale the service so that in order to cover all of New York State, we can have one editor writing 10 messages that more or less fit the whole of New York State. If we taken into account every zip code differently, we could never at scale that service. So that's sort of one way in which we use data, sort of this underlying layer of data to power this very sort of cute service that nobody, I think, and no user has any idea that this is the underlying mechanism. But it's a way for us to scale the product and reach more people. So that's sort of one way and one unique way in which we saw sort of very true ways in which data was helping products grow fast and power small teams. The other thing, which I think is very interesting, is what we do at Dig. So if any of you've gone to Dig in the last year and a half, it's completely different, right? So it's effectively become this portal for what's happening on the internet, right? The news for just new things. And it's tailored for a certain type of audience, probably male, 30+ years old. But it's seen, the editors, it's effectively powered by editors, where the old Dig used to be powered by a community, very much like Reddit. So editors are constantly, online. They're trying to figure out, okay, what's a new thing that's happening? What should be reported on Dig? And we have various tools that help them identify that. And a lot of what we do is look at just a variety of signals online, where a lot of them are public. So a lot of the signals coming from Twitter, from Facebook public pages, things that are posted on Reddit, right? Any of these forums where we can take different, especially social signals, and identify deviations from the norm. So we could say, well, for a New York Times article, this is doing really well given the amount of time, between publication and now. So we're constantly looking at all these articles that are published and assessing sort of the value in terms of these signals that we're getting, very public signals, along with our internal signals. So we have a variety of signals internally where we're looking at not only what's being published, but also what's being read and what's being shared. Right? So taking these three things, building a model that then tells you what is doing exceptionally well for this domain, for this amount of time to be published, and then helping sort of feeding that internally to the editors. So giving them the ability to scour the web and then only look at a variety of chosen articles versus just seeing everything. So they rely on some of these systems and now sort of use them to effectively find content at very early points of time and then highlight them on Dig. So we constantly think about this intersection of how do we use technology, especially data, which is what I do, to power these editorial decisions. One thing, and I'll just close by talking about this thing that we're working on now, is we're thinking about different ways to rank and score content, where I think it's typically, it's very common for companies to highlight the most trending piece of content or most popular piece of content, be it, you can define these concepts very differently, right? If you're Twitter, it's one way. If you're Facebook, it's one way. And if you're the New York Times, it's completely different. But we're thinking about a variety, like various different scores. So what would a diversity metric look like? So I don't want to look at the most popular content, but I want to look at content that's being consumed and shared by a diverse audience, right? And using a lot of public signals that are available now from social media, we can do that. So I'll just leave you with that, and we can get back to any of these ideas.
Great, thank you. Thank you. And then we have Alicia Surratt, who's the founder and CEO of Pentigran Capital, an angel investment vehicle on seed and early stage investment. She's going to talk a little bit about what are some of the things she sees in content and investing for them.
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. Anytime I've spoken in the classes, I've always been really impressed by how incredibly intelligent the students are, how diverse they are, and how driven they are. So as Sandeep mentioned, I'm an angel investor. I swim in looking at new business proposals every day. I read voraciously, and so I'm constantly thinking about what are the themes out there, what am I investing around, where am I putting my money to work? And so coming into today, I made a list of some of the big themes that really drive me that have been top of mind this year. Hopefully that will be helpful to you. But what I found after I made my notes is that I felt like they all really came back to one common theme, and you'll see what I mean as I go through some of the big points. But I think what really has driven a lot of my thought throughout the course of this year with the investments I've made is really this concept of the empowered individual. So let me start off and talk about one of the big themes, and that is a lack of barriers that we see now. It's easier than ever to start a business, as you well know, in terms of costs and administrative burdens, and it's so incredibly easy now relative to the way it used to be to start a YouTube channel or to blog or to self-publish. And so that's something I constantly think about, empowering individuals to have a voice in a way that they never really did before. And also you see another big theme of unbundling, right? And so it's not just individuals having a voice and speaking their minds, but also being able to receive information from who you want when you want it, right? Instead of saying, oh, I have to go through this big gatekeeper, to subscribe to this magazine if I want to hear the voices of these particular individuals. Like, no, I can just go to Twitter and subscribe to 100 journalists that I find fascinating, and I can get that information directly from them in a way that I never did before, or subscribe to certain documentaries, or download content from a Netflix. Another big theme, of course, that we all are seeing all the time is mobile and social, right? And I think that this also comes back to the theory of the empowered individual, because you have content that's available, on the go, all the time. We're constantly consuming information from people that we're following. We're constantly putting out information every bit of the day that we feel like we want to. And we're also driven so much more today by the concept of getting information from influencers like we haven't been in the past, right? So gone are the days of these big companies being able to influence mass markets by putting out huge amounts of marketing spend. Now it's really proven that you're making purchase decisions by what your friends are recommending to you more than ever, right? And so you're getting that kind of information again from other individuals, you're subscribing to them, and you're really putting a lot of weight in what people are telling you, what they trust, and those are your trusted advisors. Another huge theme I think about all the time is big data, which you of course talked a bit about, and really the theory of the democratization of information, right? The information that we have at our fingertips now, and how that also empowers individuals to make a difference, is just absolutely fascinating to me. I read an article about how there was an issue with restaurants dumping oil, and how do you figure out who's doing it, and how do you find them? And because of the big data that governments are now making available to us, basically what they did was find out where the sewers were being clogged, and then they could back into the information of which restaurants were dumping the oil when they shouldn't have been. And just the massive amounts of information that's coming online now is just really incredible. I recently made an investment in a company called Enernol, which is the first real-time energy policy data company out there, and it's just incredible to think about the information they're now making available to people that are making trillions of dollars worth of information decisions in the energy space. Also, and this kind of piggybacks right on the idea of this big data being available, is transparency is just at a level that we have never seen before. And I think about this every day. I mean, we all have our cameras at our fingertips. People are documenting major social injustices, whether it's, and people are reporting, again, coming back to this empowered individual, people have voices like, you haven't seen in the past, and we're able to consume information from people that, without these barriers that we've seen in the past. And so the reporting that you see on things like, genital mutation, or rape kits not being tested. I mean, it's just incredible when I think about the kind of transparency that exists now in the world. And with transparency, also lends into my final theme, is accountability. So now, it's incredible to me when I read the news about domestic abuse cases and the implications for the NFL, or what's going on at UVA with the rape cases, comments made at an Uber dinner to journalists and the implications of that, or what the Microsoft CEO says in passing about trusting karma to get you ahead. I mean, it's really incredible. So I think, again, when I think about what's going on in the world, a lot of it really comes back to this concept of the empowered individuals, like the information that we have at our fingertips now, the transparency that we have to make decisions, the amount of data that we have to make decisions. And it certainly, it comes back to one of these big mantras that I think about constantly in my life, and also with respect to my investments, and that is, your dollars and your actions are your votes, right? I mean, we're able to trace so much about what individuals do now with respect to what we read, what we click on, how much time we spend on websites, what our purchases are, and all of these things become reflections of who we are as individuals. And also for entrepreneurs, being able to look at that data as our consumer base and be able to to take information and make smart decisions on that. And with all of these themes, I think come opportunities. So I think because you have all these empowered individuals putting out information, we're consuming so much information, I think we as a public, and I personally feel like I'm constantly swimming in content, right? It's amazing how much is out there. And so for the organizations that are able to curate that for individuals, there's just tremendous opportunity. So I think that creates a lot of efficiency and also the ability to discover things that you never would have and do that in a very condensed way. Also, because so many individuals have such specific profiles out there now, and we're seeing them in amounts that we never really did before, there's massive opportunities in customizing products for people because you know so much more about predilections and preferences. And people are consuming things in completely different ways. I mean, you look at like the phenomenon of Serial as a podcast and the success there. And then finally, because again, all of this information is out there, there's just incredible opportunities when it comes to crowdsourcing. And so I'm constantly interested in the way that businesses are crowdsourcing information and also crowdfunding to be able to build their products and be successful. I invested in a company earlier this year called Nomad, which raised over $1 million through crowdfunding platforms. It was quite incredible. But more importantly, they used that as an opportunity to directly interact with their consumers and get market feedback and then constantly iterate on their product. And companies have just not been able to do this in the past like a company can be empowered to do today. So anyway, it all comes back to this idea of the empowered individual, and I constantly think about the entrepreneurs that I invest in, how they're making use of the transparency available to us, how they're building on those themes. I invested in a food company also earlier this year that really markets itself on having full transparency in the supply chain, which I think people care about. People care about what they're putting in their bodies and being able to say, you know, from start to finish, these are all the ingredients and this is where they come from. So anyway, for me, I constantly think about the empowered individual and how our dollars and our actions are our votes.
Great, thank you. Thank you. And the final panelist, Zephyr Teachout. She's a associate professor of law at Fordham University, but you may know her better as having sought the Democratic nomination for governor of New York, and she came in second with more than a third of the vote. So I'm sure there are people here who may have voted for her as well. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. I feel like somebody who used to be a great marathoner who hasn't run for a while, coming back, because this used to be my people. I was the national director of the Sunlight Foundation. We did some of the first crowdsourced journalism. I'm sorry. Well, anyway, so what I want to tell you is that the house is on fire. So I'm not going to talk about the sort of tech opportunities, which is an area that I love and would love to get into. I want to talk about morality, and I want to talk about power. And I have three very simple points. The first is that, thank you for the note, but I do think the house is on fire in terms of our democracy. And the last time that we had this level of concentrated power and inequality in our country, the single most important force that allowed us to get out of it was the journalists. So the 1907 Tillman Act, which prohibited direct corporate contributions to campaigns, was not really supported by the Democrats and not really supported by the Republicans. But you couldn't find a single major paper in the country, including the Wall Street Journal and Cosmopolitan, that wasn't talking about the importance of getting corporate direct funding out of campaigns. In fact, you can't make sense of our successful escape from 1900, and I think about 1900 all the time because we'd fought a civil war and had, no meaningful political or economic rights for African Americans. Suffragists had been around, and yet women couldn't vote, and the populace had failed. There's no way to make sense of what we did after 1900. without understanding the power of incredibly feisty, committed, populist journalists. So I can't tell you how to make a buck. But I can tell you that if journalists stay on the sidelines and see what is happening in politics as an interesting, terrible tragedy, as opposed to something that you are deeply and personally invested in, we are all in trouble. You can't make sense of the civil rights movement without journalists. So that's the first point. The second is also about power, and I think there's an opportunity here, and I don't have an answer for you. But I think a lot of people, I'm coming in and out of, can you guys hear me okay? Is that better? So what I see in political reporting, and I think many people probably see this, is a kind of dissonance between two different kinds of reporting. Is this better?
No,
Okay.
just put it back. Put it back where it
maybe
was.
just
Yeah.
Okay.
We could hear you.
You get the Coriolis effect. So you'll see one day a report as if we are in the West Wing land, where you talk about the key players being the individual candidates, the political parties, and another report another day about money in politics. But these aren't fused in a meaningful way. So instead, I think there's a sense of unreality when people read about politics because they're not getting a complete, continuous portrait of power. Instead, we're still acting, and I don't blame journalists for this, I just feel like you've been in West Wing land, or maybe even House of Cards land, where the key characters are parties and politicians, and we're suddenly in Game of Thrones. So how do you then report on this new power reality in a meaningful way? So what you'll see is somebody like Dan Loeb, somebody who's gotten very politically involved in New York politics. Do you know who he is? You may know him as a hedge fund person, not in terms of his political involvement. So there'll be maybe one story about Dan Loeb and the amount of contributions he's made. But if this is Game of Thrones, you want to hear an ongoing story about what he's doing, because he is actually the key political figure. The individual story doesn't cut it. The ongoing narrative requires the ongoing storytelling about these characters. You see this maybe with the Koch brothers, but they're sort of a rarity. And in fact, you saw the recent Princeton study about this country being more of an oligarchy than a democracy. It requires a different kind of reporting than the kind of reporting we've had, with a different cast of characters instead of the reporting from the 1990s. I guess my last point is more about, so I guess I'll just make one, I have one tech idea, but I'm not going to tell it to you. So the last sort of example of that I see is in something like Amazon. So I see Amazon as one of the most important political players in the country right now. Jeff Bezos is not only taking over the supply chain of a great number of ideas in our country, but has bought the Washington Post. So it carries a veto over any time there's going to be a change in the sales tax of the internet, or a veto over any time there's going to be a change in antitrust policy or pricing law, which Brandeis, among others, thought was one of the most important sources of power for taking on concentrated power. But again, we rarely see Bezos as a political figure. Again, it's an accidental as opposed to an ongoing story. So what I see in this country is an extraordinary sleeping giant in terms of people who care about politics and want to get engaged in politics, but don't find truthful political storytelling in the papers and news media that they see. And so I hope that there's also an opportunity to return to the profit model of the penny press journalism, not just the political power of the penny press journalism. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you. I want to just follow up, kind of throw out a general question that I think each of you touched upon in some way. It's really not that easy to draw. I'm sorry. We need more reporters covering certain types of stories. You're using software and algorithms. You've created a platform. You're investing in all these different platforms. Could you tell us a little bit about whether this kind of journalism, the next set of reporting that's necessary, whether there's software or algorithms or something that can help with that, to get the word out, to find that vital information that we may be missing?
I mean, I don't think it's anything automated, right? We'd like to think that, we can use algorithms to replace all of you guys. But that's not going to happen. But what we can do is use them to empower editors and empower journalists, right? So what they're really great at, or automated mechanisms are really great at, is just searching through a ton of records, right? And searching wisely, so with a few set parameters. So I think with the help of these automated mechanisms, one can search through all these records, but also identify certain patterns that you wouldn't be able to identify otherwise. And maybe you're identifying patterns that you kind of intuitively everyone knows, but you're sort of highlighting them with specific record data, which potentially gives a story more power, more basis. So I've seen this happen over and over again, where folks using data, especially around storytelling, tell stories that we sort of know, phenomenons that we sort of know exist, but the fact that they use certain data to prove them, and the fact that they share their methods and they're reproducible, give it so much more power.
So, do you guys hear me? Yeah, okay. So I guess I'll say that we shouldn't be writing stories to put the giant to sleep, but we should look at the stories, and again, back to my main point, how can you take a story and act upon it? Every journalist should really be thinking, this is what I'm reporting on, and now this is what you can do to change the fucked up situation that I'm reporting on. And if you guys start thinking about it in that way, I think that's the only way for us to lull the giant to sleep, but to actually wake it up and make change. That's kind of how I look at it.
So I would echo some of the thoughts there, and that I think that there are two big things I would focus on. One would be finding smart ways to search the data and find information to bring to the public's light. And then the other one would be empowering individuals to share information on a much easier basis.
I'll be the Luddite here again. I do, of course, there's an extraordinary sort of value in searching. But like in polling, you're only going to search for things you find. And it's absolutely critical to have characters who are thinking and therefore starting to search for different things. If you ever try to fully automate, you actually can miss the story and you miss the giant. I'm going to have to leave early because I have to teach property law. But so the one thing that Jeff has probably heard me talk about this 10 years ago. But the one thing that I've always been sort of excited about is, especially media organizations that combine big data with a populist language. So often, like, investigative journalism organizations are just for elites, as opposed to sort of speaking in a more broadly populist language. But who then have regular meetings. Like, it is, why not have, because real power, this is where we may disagree. I don't think real power comes from an individual acting alone. Real power comes traditionally in American history when people actually meet and organize together. And so media organizations that then encourage regular, weekly, monthly, church-like engagements around issues, and then use technology to enable that, are actually surprisingly lacking. Like, I'm surprised you don't see the monthly Oprah meetup playing this kind of powerful role. Because in American history, we have this long tradition of associational life, and yet we haven't so far seen media organizations, contemporary media organizations, be tapping into that associational life culture and building local communities.
Great. Alicia, this question's for you, and others can answer it as well. But we've tapped advertising in journalism, advertising, subscription models, memberships, events, e-commerce, all of those, and they all seem to have issues. And in reviewing all these startups all the business plans you look at, is there a business model that may seem far-fetched for journalism, but we should give it a try, see if there's some potential there?
Yeah, I wish I had a magic bullet for you on this one. None of the ones out there, I agree with you. The subscription model isn't working, and content is becoming much easier and easier to find. I recently, just last week, I was looking at something in the gaming space, which I don't think is the exact corollary for this, but I found it fascinating because, to the extent that this maybe brings about some brainstorming, it's worth mentioning. A lot of the gamers have the same issues, right? Like, someone's playing a game and they don't want to see advertising in the game, and they don't want to randomly hit a button and have a pizza come to their house, right? And they don't really like the freemium model where it's like, yeah, I'm playing the game, and then all of a sudden, in order to get to this next level, I have to pay $20 or. So there was this really interesting entrepreneur that came up with this idea where he created tournaments, and the two people who were going to compete against each other were each putting like $1 into the tournament, right? And whoever won the tournament got X amount of money, and then the game developer got a certain amount of money, and they got a certain amount of money to facilitate. And I just thought, well, that's a really brilliant idea for gaming. I don't think that this is relevant in journalism, but I did think that that was pretty interesting that he came up with a whole different model that where these games could be monetized, right? And so like we're in a market where 80% of these games are freemium, and they were struggling to figure out how to monetize, and when advertising didn't work, this was a way that the consumers like really wanted to participate, and everyone wound up winning, right? They wound up winning, and the indie gamers in particular, like the 80% of the market that weren't like the big names out there, actually were poised to be much better than like some of the larger players. So ideas like that I find fascinating. And again, I wish I had the magic bullet for you in the journalist space, but I agree that what is being batted around right now it's not working. And more content is coming out there, and more content is coming out with the expectation that it's free. And so like something's got to give.
Great. Jeff, just give me a time check because we started later. I'm not sure. 10 minutes? Great, and I know you have to go teach. Okay, let me get a mic for you. Okay, thanks. Saul has a question. Just tell us who you are and.
Saul Hansel of CTV.
Mic's not on.
Now? There we go. Hi, I'm Saul Hansel. And since several people talked about content, and particularly opinion content, Zephyr, I thought, threw out a challenge to the industry saying, are you writing about what matters? Are you writing about things that will change the country for the good? And you said people don't trust media. And Milena also talked about calling for more opinion. And I'm trying to figure out how to get the trust back of people who don't trust media of all sorts. And I wonder whether you really see that the way you get trust is to, again, have the classic advocacy journalism. I'm telling you these facts to show you how bad the thing that's bad is and call for revolution. Or is there a more old-fashioned sense that there is a separation between fact and opinion, where the facts can be agreed upon and we can rebuild trust? Or is there, how do we combine not being bland, doing stuff that's good, and actually building trust in this era when things are so polarized and people have meaningless talking points in lieu of substance?
Well, I think I can out-old-fashioned you. I think it's Ida Tarbell, Lincoln Steffens time. So and different times require different styles of journalism. So I think one can successfully have an internal ethos of truth-telling, like not burying facts, and to still have a sense of fight. And I actually suspect that there's this opportunity for gaining watchers if you then are seen as somebody engaging in fights. I'm all about the fight. So whether it's in gaming or in sports, which is the one that has figured out how to really make some money. So I think one can have integrity in truth-telling with a perspective. And I guess I just think it's harder to not have a perspective now than perhaps has been at other times.
And the other thing I'll just add on to that, because I completely agree, is that you want to have hope on top of it all, to say this, tell the story from a perspective of there is hope for change, right? And so when you infuse that, I think Nation Swell is one I love reading them because they pick out stories that actually have a lot of hope in them. And I think they have gained my trust as somebody I go to read, because they're not just telling me everything horrible that's happening in the world, they're telling me stories of hope. And I'm immensely drawn to that from kind of a personal perspective.
I think one of the things I find interesting about the Serial podcast is that Sarah Koenig takes us through the whole thought process, right? So she may wind up forming an opinion at the end, but the transparency of the reporting and the whole process and everything that she does along the way, I think is just incredibly rich. I mean, so I feel like the more we see things like that and the more we see offerings like that, the more I'm inspired about the kind of ethics and the kind of detail and hard work that go into these processes.
Great, thank you.
Over to one of our entrepreneurial fellows here at CUNY in the past.
Hi, I'm Sami Chowdhury. My question is, innovation, we always talk about action, relevance, insight, sort of making it customer-centric. But the problem is that most media, particularly in this country, depressingly, in the land of the free, unlike my home country where governments generally control media, there are oligarchs, there are charities, there are these non-profit organizations that are doing all the stuff you guys are talking about, and they're building amazing audience share. How can entrepreneurship survive in a world where everybody's doing it not for profit, where the journalists are largely happy working for status rather than for income? What do you guys think we need to do to actually reignite entrepreneurship in the journalism sector?
So since I have to leave, I'm going to take it. I'm sorry, but and then I'm going to run. It's not that I'm scared of your question. So I am so excited to be with those who are funding entrepreneurs, but the true story of entrepreneurialism in recent American history is that it's on the radical decline in the last 25 years. That's true across the board. That you basically see fewer and fewer true companies that are not just company in name only, but actually have at least one employee being created over the last 25 years. So we need, better antitrust laws, and that's across the board. And with a greater antitrust policy and anti-monopoly policy, that's not just going to help entrepreneurialism in the media sector, it's going to help entrepreneurialism across the board, which then also diversifies the flow of income, which is funding the bigger media companies. So it leads to media diversification in two really important ways. Thank you all.
Thank you, Zephyr.
I'm personally fascinated with I'm personally fascinated by the new mediums that are evolving, and I wonder whether that could answer some of the issues, right? So whether you're seeing the emergence of podcasts or crowdfunding to spearhead certain campaigns. I mean, I personally donated to Serial after I heard 2 episodes of it, but I think that there's a lot that could be pioneered in the mediums and the delivery of the content, which can separate that from all the free content out there and creating certain barriers to accessing it. And if you do it in the right way, where it's really tailored to the consumer, then I think that there's a premium that can be paid for it. But I don't have that magic answer, but it's something that I think about all the time is, could one of these mediums be part of the solution to that problem?
I'd echo many of Bill Gross's points, but the one I'd echo most would be experimentation and testing. Right, so we have one of our products that we've launched a few years ago is called Chartbeat, which is now in every publisher newsroom. Right? And it started as a completely different product or product idea where we thought, wouldn't it be interesting to have people who are on the same website chat with each other? Right? So you see another person's mouse, and then you could actually chat with them because you're reading the same article. So that was the idea. Nobody really wanted to talk to anyone else after reading an article. But the byproduct of building that and experimenting around that, creating this conversational space, was this analytical engine that could give us real-time information on the people who are visiting that site and how far they've read through the page, which is now Chartbeat. And it's its own sort of very successful company that's managed to innovate in quite a crowded space. So I'd say something I've seen over and over again at BetaWorks is just experimentation, testing things out, putting them out there, and changing them as you go.
And being open to what you learn, I think, is important too. Over here.
Yes.
Hi, excuse me, John Keefe from WNYC. I had a very BetaWorks day today. We posted something very brilliant this morning, and it lit up our Chartbeat dashboard, just as you're talking about, which is really great. And then a little bit later, it showed up on the front page of Dig, which was really cool because that got a lot of traffic. And now I'm wondering, maybe those things are related. I'm wondering, is Dig using Chartbeat client data for their front page? Okay, I was hoping it was. But otherwise, what? Yes, exactly. And but then I also wonder, what about this data collection that is going on that journalists and journalist organizations are not very good at and not very good at paying for, but seem to be very valuable in this big data world? What do we have to learn here?
I mean, I think a lot of, I'll just start, I think a lot of what you can learn is sort of even within your own ecosystem, there's so much you can learn about your audience, right? So you're effectively tailoring your website constantly to audiences of one, right? Who is this person? Like, what should I recommend to them next? And using your internal data first, you could do so much with that. So sort of having an understanding of what's going on inside your house, I think, comes first. But then sort of adding to that with external data sources, be it sort of even static public sources or dynamic sources like public Twitter data or Facebook data or Reddit data, you can sort of get a better sense for, so if you're looking for trends, what are people talking about today? What are people sharing today, right? If that matters to you. There's so many different types of signals, and it's easy to get lost in them. So I would say, first and foremost, it depends on what you're trying to achieve. And if it's to be a part of a conversation, there's certain type of signals that you would tap into. If it's feeding ads, there are other type of signals you would type into.
Great, we have one final question.
Great. My name's Jean Brooks. I'm the executive director of Hex Hackers. There's a lot of conversations around how to navigate big data. We were talking about crowdsourcing. How do we build trust in the newsroom? I think there's this broader conversation that we need to dig a little bit deeper on, which is what is the ethical role of the technologist or the media makers in building these technologies? And so maybe you guys can share, how do you navigate that question within your own communities or the technologies that you invest in?
I can start. Yeah. I mean, so from my perspective as an investor, I'm constantly meeting with entrepreneurs, and I'm making an investment in their company. I'm writing the check myself. It's my name. So for me, it's a personal check on the integrity of the entrepreneur, right? And that I think that I can only really achieve that through multiple interactions with them, seeing how responsive they are, doing references, and really just knowing that if I'm aligning my name with this person, that everything about them, is just filled with integrity, and I'm happy to be associated with that company. But I have to know that that's the way that they're going to act, that that's a part of the core of who they are, and there's no way I would write a check if that weren't the case. In fact, the name of my company is a combination of the words passion and integrity. It's the PA and the ON from passion, and the middle part is integrity. If I don't see that integrity in the individual, there's absolutely no way I would personally back them. But more importantly, there's absolutely no way I would ever recommend them to anyone in my angel network, and there would be no association with them whatsoever, because I feel like your word is your bond, your brand name means everything in the world that I operate in, and that to me is like the biggest red flag possible.
I can take a different stance. So as a product builder and data scientist, I think a lot about the type of filters that I build, because I believe that in a world where most people believe that news will find them, these filters are incredibly important, and we're seeing them everywhere. Facebook is effectively where most people go to consume their news. And Facebook is governed by an algorithm that we have no idea and no control over, right? You don't know what it'll feed you. And most people think they're sort of, it's math, right? So it's not biased, it's truthful. But there are a lot of choices that product builders and designers make as they're creating these filters. So I would say, especially in the media space, is thinking a lot about what are the unintended consequences of some of these filters, and what does it mean that we're creating these recommendation systems that keep people inside the bubble, right? Sort of recommend more similar content. How can we get away from that, and how can we experiment with different forms of optimization where we're not specifically thinking about optimizing for more clicks and ads, ad views, or eyeballs, but actually for an informed public? And I don't know all the answers to that. Yeah, I think a lot of experimentation.
For the stream?
So how do we build for inclusive technology? How do we actually flip that around and build with inclusivity sort of as the underlying tenet of what we're building? And I would say a lot of experimentation, because it's really the wild, wild west out there right now, especially with regards to recommendation systems, search, and practices around data.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing the outsider's perspective on journalism. Great insights. So thank you very much.
Thank you.